So my name is Daniel Stringfield. I'm actually the, I'll switch to the slide. I actually founded JaxLUG back in '96.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm glad you, more clapping, people are
Yay! We love you, man.
showing up. I didn't expect it
Without
still
you,
to be going this long, so I'm very happy to see that it's still going.
Created a monster.
Yeah, it won't stop. You people won't go away. Go home. No, just kidding.
You people.
No, but I left JaxLUG. I had moved to Orlando, briefly served as the treasurer for about a year at the Central Florida Linux News Group, which I think has changed or split. I'm not sure what happened to them, but they don't exist in the same form anymore. I've always been an open source kind of hacker kind of person, and that's what inspired me to start the Linux News Group, and that kind of hacker mentality is what has continued my career to learn more, continue to learn new ways of doing things, and it's gotten me to where I'm at today. And so I actually started off with Slackware. My favorite distribution is Debian. I was a Debian developer for a little while. I maintained Pine in Pico package. I was a package maintainer for a little bit. Although generally speaking, for desktop, I'm more of a Ubuntu. Just for package, they're a little quicker on the draw on maintaining for a business perspective. I've actually. I started this group in '96, so that's more than 20 years ago. That's pretty much when my IT career started. The last 5 years, I was at Amazon Web Services as a technical account manager, and then a team lead, and then moved to Google to be a technical account manager as well. I now started my own consulting company to do some optimization stuff we were talking about a little bit beforehand. What really inspired me to want to just kind of give a talk about the top five myths is in my career, both as a cloud user and as a working for a cloud provider. I heard a lot of stuff repeat, and people that sell hardware like to tell certain jokes and vice versa, and I think there's a world that we can all get along in, but I want to make sure that the true value of the cloud is understood and really maximized. So myth number one: cloud computing is just someone else's computers. Technically, that's true.
Computers are certain.
When people say it's somebody else's computer, they're not wrong. However, the cloud is not just renting a virtual server. At least that's not the way it should be when you think about using the cloud versus just standard hosting. So just as a poll of hands, how many who have worked with like a virtual private server, rented a server, or managed a box, or in a data center? Anybody actually build out data center stuff?
Data center stuff, yes. Hardware in a data center.
Who has their own rack at a data center?
Yeah.
Oh God.
Who has their own rack at home?
Oh God.
Yeah.
I put mine in a data center, so.
I even have one in my house.
I have the entire cloud and I have a rack. I have 2 racks.
The entire cloud? Whoa.
Yes. The whole cloud. Really the entire
All
cloud.
the clouds. Very.
My clouds go to 1,000.
But I'm done.
All right. So.
Is that how you put yourself to sleep, is counting?
Yes. So, it's fairly straightforward. You have a virtual server, you get an IP, you get a network, you have, it's just like a server, whether it's at home, in an office, in your traditional data center, fairly straightforward. The premise behind the cloud computing, though, is very different. The idea is being able to spin things up and down whenever you need them and don't need them. So it is partially, deploying. You can deploy a virtual server, but you don't have to keep it running. Or you can go completely serverless, and that's where I'm kind of pushing a lot of clients these days. Is you're writing code, and you're just figuring out where you're going to run the code. And where does the data need to live? And then you're not maintaining servers. Although, you can base your container on Linux. There's some people, crazy people, who want to do that on Windows too. You can, it's possible. So there's no reason to actually maintain OSs anymore. If you really don't want to. So there's still a need for a lot of the traditional administration, but one of the examples I was giving is a project I did with a client was shutting down development servers on when they're not in use. So that's a really good way. Just you're not using a resource, shut it down. Doesn't matter. It's ephemeral. It's an ephemeral workload. You just when you need it, turn it on. When you don't, turn it off. We developed, or I developed what was called the developer light switch, and the premise was whoever the first developer of the day who walked into the developer's office, they flipped the light switch on, was IoT enabled, would call a Lambda, AWS Lambda script written in Python that would then go call an API call that had another little Python backend that would look for all the servers tagged with a certain development tag and would turn them on. And then, for the last person of the day, when go turn the light switch off, it would shut everything back off. Also wrote a little panel, so if somebody wanted to turn it on in the middle of the night to debug something, or if they want to work over the weekend from home, they could still do that. But it ended up saving them $30,000 a month just by doing that. So there's a lot of things that you can't do that in your data center today. So if you're working in a traditional data center space, even if you have fully virtualized environments, you can't give the hardware back to the vendor over the weekend. Like you can with the cloud. So that's one of those areas where you can really optimize the cost there. So that's a benefit of the cloud versus just renting a virtual server.
So,
Yes.
in that example that you just gave, so cloud providers charge you by the server uptime, or how does that work?
So it depends on what exactly servers you're using, but typically they'll charge you for the amount of storage you use and the class of it. So if you're actually running a server with 2 CPUs and 16 gigs of RAM and 50 gigs of hard drive space, they'll charge you for a certain class per, depending on the vendor, anywhere from per second billing or per minute billing or somewhere in between. And then, so you pay by while it's on, and then however much provisioned storage, you still have to pay for the storage, even if it's offline, it's still there, it's still taking up space.
Okay.
But you can even take a snapshot and delete your storage, and then rehydrate rehydrate the snapshot, and so your while that's in a snapshot state, that's even smaller, even lower cost. So you can go back and forth. And that's how a lot of like development cycle pipelines, put stuff, you upload stuff, does something, drops it back down to a cheaper storage, then goes into another processing and drops it down.
Another thing is that most of these will give you free 1-year memberships. AWS and Azure will give you free 1 year.
Like AWS, I think their 1 gig of RAM, 1 vCPU instance is like 8.5 cents an hour.
Cheap.
Yeah.
Which ends up being, they're tiny, I think their nano is like $7.50 a month. Their mini or their small, whatever it is, the next one up is like $15 a month.
I just bought a reserved instance, like for the Nano it's like $29 for a year.
Right.
So I just bought 1 year reserved instance with Nano. It was
Just because I know, because I looked at it recently, Azure, they offer you a 40% discount if you reserve a 2-year instance. If you decide that you're going to buy it, you're going to basically have that VM for 2 years, or have a VM that uses that capacity for 2 years. They'll give you like a 45% discount.
Now, quick poll for, kind of continuing that, who has like a data center or something, or equivalent, where they're doing month-end data processing that takes huge amounts of, that you've built for peak? Either month-end or year-end or something. Anybody? So that's another typical scenario that we see. So yes, you can pay for reserved instances if you need that. And if you're always running, which I don't necessarily recommend all the time, but if you have that low demand, that you buy for lowest demand, and then for peak, you can do spot instances like on AWS or other.
So this is a good way to like save money by just turning off the computer power you don't need, right?
yeah.
Yeah,
But when there's like a whole bunch of demand, do they do like surge pricing or something like
No.
Uber does?
It is the opposite.
Well, the spot price changes, but
Right.
the spot price changes, but the spot price never goes over the full.
The base.
AWS used to. You could technically pay more for spot than on-demand pricing, but they changed that.
So spot pricing in Amazon is, you can say, hey, I have this virtual machine image that I want to boot up only if the cost is lower than.
like 3 cents or something
Right.
like that.
So like if, in the middle of the night when everyone turns off their dev environment for the day, and all of a sudden Amazon has a whole bunch of extra capacity. So they will then offer spot pricing for that cheaper pricing, and which then your VM could die at any moment, because
Well,
once
it
you.
goes like hybrid.
Yeah, I mean, well, yeah, there's, obviously it's not built for people who are gonna go spin up a web server in a moment. It's built for you to use the APIs.
Although I actually would recommend them for web servers. So if you have, you can actually have 2 pools of web servers. So your really spiky traffic can be in spot instance, and just if you need a whole bunch of capacity, and if that spot capacity is not available, then expand out for the more expensive one. If you know.
But it sounds like you could run into like an Enron situation where they shut down some of their power so they can jack up the prices on you all of a sudden.
Well, that is a concern, and that's where reserved instances and things like that can help. But I would say there's a lot of worked with a lot of customers who knew, because it's not just, you can also specify it's not just this one system. You can have 10 different combinations of systems. I only want to pay 5 cents. I don't care what it is. I don't want to pay more than 5 cents an hour.
Is it possible if I had a lot of money that I could basically reserve a whole bunch of computer power and then sell it out in the secondary market for a profit?
For profit?
No.
Technically, yes, because that's what a lot of managed service providers do. So they'll buy reserved instances. So they'll buy huge amounts of capacity, and they're resellers of Amazon or Google. They'll buy at wholesale price, and then they'll charge you retail price, basically. So it is technically possible.
Okay.
I personally don't see the value in it unless you're managing, you're doing IT administration for someone.
Your value add has to be there.
Yeah, you value add. But there's a lot of people who just, for some reason, also would.
But the other way, like if you bought like a reserved instance and like you realize, oh, I don't need that anymore, you can sell on the secondary market and like you probably have to lose money. I've never done it. But.
Well, I mean, like you could corner the market and everybody's screaming for cloud computing, and then you're like, okay, I got some. I don't think they're gonna corner Amazon's market. They've got quite a bit of market.
The issue with Amazon, the easy way to say that why that wouldn't work is that you're not going to be able to obscure the fact that you're running an Amazon server. So the moment you say, hey, can I buy a server from you, Joe Blow hosting company? And you go, sure, here you go. And then you go, that's an Amazon IP. That's an Amazon server. And then you can go look at the pricing on Amazon.com, And then you would know that, wow, I'm paying twice as much as I could go directly to the,
Amazon.
Again, there's a lot of companies that do value add, so there might be a good reason to do it that way.
Yeah, but I can go buy Jaguars tickets and then hold on to them, and then in game day I can go to scalp them,
yeah,
right?
that's definitely valuable in game day.
But that's why the spot market, the spot market, they stopped it so that, because what was happening is the spot market on AWS was going up over the on-demand price, and people were driving up the spot price, and figuring out how to jack up the price for other people, and then they would drop down and use something else. So they to make it more fair, so you couldn't scalp buy tickets at a higher price and reuse that processing power. There's definitely as part of this, it is somebody else's computers, but there is a finite amount of computers. But as I'll get to my next point here, because that's another myth I hear a lot, is the cloud's infinite. It's just I can keep spinning up more and more and more and more and more. Obviously, that's not the case. There is a finite amount of compute and storage, and on rare occasions, depending on the region of the provider, they'll run out of certain classes of compute or storage. It doesn't happen very often.
I was going to say, have you seen that?
I have seen it. I have seen it. It's usually in the case of Google recently, they spun up a new instance class in Frankfurt. And because of Brexit, believe it or not, they had a lot higher demand than they realized. And so everybody was moving their servers out of London to the Frankfurt data center, and it was completely unexpected. Nobody thought of, hey, Brexit's going to cause this spike in Frankfurt. And all of a sudden, these servers that were built for very kind of niche use suddenly, got totally wiped out, and they were back, backlogs.
But that's a regional issue, because they would have capacity in other regions.
Yeah, and so, and that's another thing that you can do to design when you're designing for the cloud, is stop thinking about a server. I'm running this workload. Think about a job or a workload and distribute it. So, yep.
Can you select your region where you want your cloud computers to be?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a huge deal.
And what I recommend is, depending on how you've written your app or how you run your business, is to spread them out. Just from a high availability, most cloud providers will have multiple. I don't say most, but I know AWS and Google have what's called availability zones within a region. So you have a region, you can pick a region, and then there's AWS will actually have separate buildings that are in different floodplains. Google does it a little bit differently, but they still have different data feeds and different cooling systems, so they can have complete meltdown on one half of the data center and everything on the availability zones unaffected.
Yeah, I'm thinking how Europe has different data privacy laws than we do. So have you ever heard of anybody they just store their customer data on the cloud, they don't know where, and suddenly it turns out that what they were doing is illegal based on where that particular.
That's huge.
Yeah,
really
so that's
huge?
definitely something that I've run into quite a bit. And it's something, because a lot of customers will ask, because there's GDPR, there's a whole, all sorts of European data sovereignty laws. There's even stuff where if you're dealing with the US government, you have to keep it inside the United States. It doesn't necessarily, depending on what kind of data class, it may have to be in a special kind of data center. So, Amazon has what they call a GovCloud, which is for government workloads. And you don't necessarily, just because you're dealing with the government doesn't mean you have to run in there. But if you're storing certain data classifications, you would run it in that cloud region. Although they actually have two other issues as well.
I'll give an example of Microsoft's cloud. When you sign up for Microsoft, for like hosted Outlook or whatever, hosted email, you say European data centers, US data center. You can actually put mailboxes in different countries based on that issue of where does that data have to reside. So you don't necessarily know where in the country, you can guess, but you can say, hey, all these companies, when it's not just renting a server, you're getting a service. Every service nowadays has a European Union cloud, a US cloud, a Chinese cloud.
Yep, Chinese is big, and they've got their own whole thing because of the Chinese firewall.
Right. Well, O365 has an entire separate cloud, that's separate logins and everything.
Just for Chinese.
For Chinese.
Yep. Yeah.
That's probably more of an issue for like CDNs, where you just upload the data and it's being mirrored in a bunch of different locations.
Right.
Yeah, and so you can specify with most CDNs. It's interesting. A lot of CDNs will stop at the Chinese border, so you have to use a different CDN.
I'm saying that's one of the only times where like you say upload in the United States, it could be in Europe just because it's on the network.
Yeah.
Google had that. That's it was a long time ago where Google was replicating data across, zones. So your Gmail mailbox, if they for whatever reason were having some maintenance in the US data center, that went a long time ago. We're talking 8-9 years ago. They were replicating it to Europe while they did maintenance here. And people were like, well, hold on, now my data is, capturable by another entity. So my data is here in the US, my backup happens to be in Europe. And you guys all behind the scenes, but governments were saying, hey, we can't subpoena a US company, but we can ask, the UK entity for their data in the UK data center, and all of a sudden their data's there somehow. Well, how? Oh, because that's for backups. That way it had more, something. Some behind the scenes magic said that a copy of your data didn't exist there. So of recently, they've all sorts of really specific staying in this perspective.
Yeah. So there's the cloud vendors are getting a lot better at defining geopolitical borders and keeping those resources within those. And so that sometimes can be part of that finite resource, that you need a particular type of resource in this particular region because of a geopolitical purpose, like you have to be in Canada, so your choices are limited to Canada versus the United States, or in Europe versus, you can be inside the European Union. Oddly enough, or not, funny enough, because of Brexit too, there's two countries that you are technically not part of the European Union that everybody thinks of as just being part of Europe. It's, of course, the UK and Switzerland. So there are separate. Those are separate regions. So if you have storing EU data, it cannot be stored in like a London data center or in Switzerland. So that's why you're starting to see people build out data centers in those locations specifically to address those locality needs.
And they will have different pricing.
Yes. Yes.
The instance in Switzerland will cost more. Partly because it's a new data center maybe, or
well, it costs more to run. Like
right.
It's electricity in every single, and this is one of those things where the cloud, when I talk about the cloud infinite, it's seemingly infinite because there are millions of compute nodes and millions of storage nodes in every single data center, and these data centers are multiple football field in size, and there's Amazon, of course, is well known for being secretive of where their data centers are. Google, of course, will show it to you on Google Maps, exactly where all their data centers are. I show you pictures. They will escort you away from the building if you try to approach it.
Microsoft will give you a tour.
Yeah.
Well then,
Yeah.
because yeah,
And they have accounts, like that whole like, find, like, running out of particular of their VM types.
yeah.
There's if you're a big enough customer, you can see the count of available VMs.
Yeah.
Because that's a big thing where, because their cloud's obviously the newest, and a couple years ago it was the smallest.
Yeah,
You
well,
could totally see, like, they were running out of common instance types
Yeah.
pretty often in
Yeah.
America. And you would be able to see, like, how many can I have right now?
yeah,
and they
well,
would be like-
apparently we're not that big because Microsoft told us, yeah, we're not going to tell you where they are.
Yeah, well,
So,
Yeah.
gotta be
Some
bigger,
sort
I
of-
guess.
logo that I have associated with this, that's a bigger
Oh,
entity.
please, we know you just spend that much money with them.
Oh, yeah. I am beholden to
But yeah,
to
so,
Dad.
so it is a game, because the account really is not infinite. I have actually worked with oddly enough, one of my customers was a vendor that all they did was analyze electricity bills, and for Amazon, and they would actually look at, you would get, the power bill for one data center was larger than the GDP for a lot of countries. And, not combined, but a lot of individual countries. So they have a lot of data scientists, data engineers who are capacity planning for peak demand, and that's why you see things like spot pricing and from Amazon and similar mechanisms from other providers where when they have spare capacity, they will give it to you at a discount so you can run more when they don't need it. Black Friday, Cyber Monday is the definitely one of the top peak usage of cloud vendors, but it's not the only one. And oddly enough, that's why like Prime Day exists. They invented Prime Day, or at least that's the lore. Was that Prime Day was invented to stress test their peak load. So so they because that's always the first and so Prime Day is the second biggest sale day for Amazon. First is Black Friday, Cyber Monday. So that's an opportunity for them to stress test. But they have capacity for all of that, and they have capacity for everyone else to do that. And if you are going to do a very large peak demand, and you know that you're going to have peak demand, definitely work with your cloud provider to do that. And that was part of my job as a TAM. I work with customers, and typically it takes 2 or 3 months to order hardware. Although they're constantly ordering hardware, but the more in advance you can tell them, if you're expecting to run 10 instances, it's not a big deal unless it's 10 of the most rarest instance. But if you all of a sudden need to run 1,000, they may not have enough on certain days of the year.
I wonder what Amazon's AWS bill is.
So the capacity, the key here too, though, is just capacity planning. They're constantly, cloud vendors are constantly doing capacity planning. Some of them better than others. Some of them, that's built into their pricing model as well. So that's, they're figuring out what that demand is going to be using machine language, machine learning, etc. That gives them the ability to predict what that peak usage is, so they only buy what they absolutely need, and they can predict that demand pretty well. And so you don't. It seems like it's infinite because there's always someone. The minute before you click deploy, somebody's in there cracking the server for you. All right, so myth number 3. It's automatically safe. It's in the cloud.
I don't think I've ever heard that, but you know.
As a TAM, you know, working for both Amazon and Google, and even as a customer, because prior to that, a lot of what I did was data protection. So I did system administration, managed backups and storage, and so my job was disaster recovery, and making sure that all of that data was there. And then I go, oh, no, we're moving to the private cloud. We're moving to AWS. We don't need backups anymore. No, that's you're less likely to have certain types of failures because there's more durability built into certain things. But nobody gives 100% uptime guarantees. Nobody gives 100% data availability. It's just impossible. Or
To illustrate that, was anyone here for my Minecraft on a Linux server talk? So I ran that Minecraft server for like 2 months, like maybe 3 months, and I had a failure and had to re-spool up another instance, and the world was backed up because it's not 100% guaranteed. And that was a dinky little Minecraft server on a T2 micro.
Right, Amazon servers will fail.
yeah,
And they'll say, you know, like, hey, your server died, we turned it back
gone.
on, but good luck.
yeah. And so
It was gone.
So there, you know, and actually, I mean, that was one of those things is you design for failure. You know, you don't plan for HA, you design for failure. So, you know, you can build in scheduled backups. You know, instead of running, if you have like a web server that's more or less static content, even if it's an interactive system, you build an image and you deploy it, and you just run as many copies of that server as you need at any given time. And if it dies, who cares? You just deploy as a new one. You know, making sure you have backups. Traditional backups or some sort of DR plan, whether it be a script that just redeploys everything, or you know backs up individual data sets. Your backup method is going to be different from a traditional on-prem kind of mindset, where you know you're not backing up to tape. You could back up to S3. You could back up to NFS storage. So you could do a snapshot. You know, Google Cloud Storage, Azure Storage, I forget what they call theirs. But you know, everybody has some sort of object storage. They're all kind of, you know, there's definitely convergence between all the cloud vendors of the type and method of how they offer these types of classes of storage. And so you can apply those in different ways to deploy. My recommendation there is to design everything to throw it away. So that now of course you can't do that if you're running SAP. Certain, you know, there's certain applications, CRM applications, where you can't, if your database falls over, you can't just go, oh, let me just deploy from my original copy. You know, you need to have backups of that, but the front end servers, you don't. You know, those are things that you may not necessarily need to back up. You just, if it fails, you just redeploy a new copy. And so that's another one of those things where you know, where the cloud has an advantage because you don't care about the hardware anymore. You only care about what you're running and what needs to run.
You know, Dan, one of the things that comes to mind for me is, for example, misconfigured clouds. You know, you keep hearing about, you know, somebody's data that are stored on Amazon and
Capital One.
Yeah.
and they left it read only, but to everybody.
Yes.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
See, Amazon's durability numbers, their SLAs don't count for you accidentally hitting delete on your data either.
Well, that's I think that's the next myth.
Okay. Sorry for jumping the.
Just give it a
That's good. But so just to to that point though, quick poll of, show of hands. How many people leave their data center keys or their office keys out front of their office? Anybody?
Leave their office keys in front of their office.
Yeah, like the
Yeah,
physical key to your office, do you leave it
Or
like
your
on the front porch?
password, you know, your root login password, do you take that to the outside of your office door?
Let me in. Just under your
Don't
keyboard.
do that in the cloud either, and that's what happens. That's, you know, with like the Capital Ones and everybody else, there's breaches, and as a TAM, I had people contact me on a almost weekly basis because somebody uploaded their access keys to GitHub. And within minutes, Bitcoin, a whole fleet of Bitcoin mining servers were deployed because there's people scanning GitHub for access keys, and they just keep trying, like, okay, can I try in this region? No, this doesn't work here. Let me try it here. Let's try it here. Oops. I can spin up, 5,000 nodes of
Monero miner.
yeah, Bitcoin, whatever, because most GPU, because those are the fastest. So any kind of GPU-based mining, Monero is now going to a new model that's going to be CPU bound. That's going to be really high end on the CPU. So I can see, AMD hyper-threading, with huge amounts of EPYC cores, making, that's going to be the next big Monero rush for hardware as everybody dumps their GPU cards. But that's one of those things where it's not safe just because you put it in the cloud. You still have to have data security standards and practices.
How do we know that, your boss isn't secretly mining our proprietary data?
So there are.
That's a good question.
There are.
Just wink twice if you can't answer that.
So there are, if you, no, I can't speak for the Chinese clouds, because those, somebody probably is scanning, that's why they have separate entities there. But there's the consideration of a control plane, and then you have a data plane. And so, in the case of Amazon, Amazon is responsible for the control plane, and then you run in the data plane. And so they have access to the control plane, but not your data plane. And in fact, Google is even stricter on that sort of thing, where they don't have access, they don't know what you're running. So when I was a TAM at Google, I can't go and look and say, oh, this is what you're running in Google. I have no idea.
But you can't, because you gotta send these instructions to a processor, and you can't just split them off and say. Sorry.
Well, you're right, the cloud's not listening, but the phone.
Yeah. Don't worry, the cloud's, someone's listening to you. There's also
Alexa's right there.
It's not tied.
What?
I tried to buy something on Amazon with it, it didn't work.
Yeah, he turned off buying on that.
Yeah.
There's some fun tricks.
Can you set an alarm clock?
But yeah, so the general best practice here is, besides making sure you have some sort of backup mechanism, you want to make sure that you're using minimum required access controls. So if you're running a server that needs to have access to an S3 bucket or a GCS bucket, you can run a service account that the credentials rotate. And so if the server's compromised,
They won't have access for long.
they'll have access for maybe 30 seconds, and it rotates again. And there's a new key, unless they keep on the box. Yeah. So there's audits too. The major cloud providers all have various audits. So SOC 1, SOC 2, SOC 3, all the standard standard audits that, there's FedRAMP compliance audits, there's all sorts of things that where they have to show exactly what they have access to and what they don't have access to. And so, talking, before at the beginning, when I first got here, we were waiting outside, talking about trying to reset the Meraki passwords, try getting locked out of your AWS account as an enterprise customer that's paying $1 million a month. A lot of lawyers get involved. So, because we're not just going to give anybody access to that, because we don't. There's all sorts of hoops that have to be jumped through that take months. Happened to a bank. Always fun to have to tell a bank, nope, you can't get into your data center.
Nice.
Yes.
But he got fired, right? And the only guy that that had the credentials got let go or something?
Well, this is actually one of my customers. Not my direct customer, but in my office, had a banking customer whose they lost their root credentials and had enabled two-factor authentication and verbal password authentication, because they're like, enable every single possible authentication method possible because we want to be super secure. But then the only person who knew about it left the company. And so they're like, they couldn't get back in. They're like, can't. So they were able to keep running certain things, but they couldn't change their name and the primary contacts or their billing data. So that for 3 months.
Really not all this stuff, yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that takes months of legal back and forth of executives signing paperwork and going back, legal teams working to authenticate that you are who you say you are.
But as a cloud provider, shouldn't you anticipate this situation and kind of steer your customers away from making foolish mistakes like that?
That would be a good idea, yes.
But it's also up to the customer to do the things
Make
that
good
are
choices.
But the customers are like bankers and stuff who really aren't,
They're just providing.
they don't know.
They're providing a platform for you.
They're the IT guys.
No, they're just providing the platform for you. So
Yeah.
if you're too
So
dumb, if you're
there's
dumb
there's a
setting it
standard-
up, then it's on you.
Excuse me.
All the cloud providers have a very similar operating model, but basically there's AWS. I know AWS is by heart the best, so I'll use that example. There's the separation of ownership. There's things that Amazon is responsible for, and there are things that the end user is responsible for, and it's clearly spelled out that you are responsible for maintaining your access keys to your infrastructure.
Well, lots of things are clearly spelled out, but how many of you guys actually read those 70-page documents before you click, I accept?
If you're signing up for
We have lawyers.
That's what lawyers are for.
I don't know, it just doesn't sound like the user experience is very positive at your office.
Yeah, no, it
You know,
can't be.
It
And
doesn't
it's-
work there anymore.
Yeah.
You
So-
keep saying him.
But no,
guys
and
are-
that's,
you
but
guys
that
are
was
using it.
part of, that was part of my job as a town. was
It's
to
no
oversee
longer
it.
my problem.
Right?
But it's
It boils down to when that happens, they're basically gonna tell you, well, that sucks. Anyways, here's
Yeah.
the process.
yeah. So
Yeah.
so there
And you
there's a
can't blame
process
them
to
because
do it.
this is a
It says,
security
this is
matter.
what we cover, this is what you cover, and you have to
Yeah.
cover the things that you cover.
And their
Yeah.
customers would not be okay with getting service if there was a workaround where every random, sysadmin in Amazon could access your data, right, and reset your password.
Yeah.
I can speak on behalf of,
That's why lawyers are involved.
right, there's massive amounts of lawyer time
Service
that goes into,
agreements and.
hey, we
yeah.
cannot let our data, be,
And for the government to
accessed
get in there,
by-
they have to verify that all this is true 4 times before they can move one thing over.
I mean, I understand your points, but it sounds like at some point the lawyers have created a system that encourages massive amounts of lawyer time, which may not be totally necessary. Like my divorce,
And so here's the thing about
It
the
didn't
problem.
have to be that
You
hard.
will never meet these people face to face. And I'm just gonna reach out to them and go, yo, I'm an admin of this thing and I locked myself out, let me in. That's actually a pretty
basic and old hacking method.
Yeah.
He calls some
How do I
company
know
up.
who the hell I am?
He calls
They
some
need to
company
verify.
up. I'm the CEO of blah blah.
Give me something.
Give me access to this. I need
Reset
it.
my password now.
My guy quit or I fired him.
Yeah.
Like, and if you don't give me access, I'm suing your company.
Hence why there's lawyers involved, so that way we can sign like indemnity forms that would free them of any liability with that, but also prove that they did their verification.
Look at cell phone, SIM hijacking. You call up AT&T and be like, hey, here's the last four of my social. I got a new phone.
Move it over.
Boom, now I got your number. Right? That's a very common attack.
Yeah.
It happens every day.
Wow.
And you can
SMS
use that then
verification is
to,
terrible.
if you have SMS enabled second factor authentication, to get into the next
That cost
thing.
me $6,000.
Yeah, did
Gets
you ever
into
get that
your-
cleared up?
What?
So
Get your
don't
money
use
cleared up?
SMS, that's the other thing, so
No,
don't use
because we got it
SMS,
on
two-factor authentication for
Wasn't
Your,
on the credit card.
your cloud login
Yep.
or anything else.
Yeah, we had to sign lots of paperwork, like individually saying, hey, there is no undo for there's no password reset for your, break the glass admin account.
Yeah.
And then we have those just because if I lock myself out as me, well, I better hope that my other coworker's awake.
Yep.
If not, then I'm gonna hit that break the glass button, the account, which is gonna fire off emails and start a workflow that
Yeah.
is gonna be pretty embarrassing for me.
It's like you seal that inside of an envelope and stick it inside of a safe. That's the break the glass.
Yeah.
Account. Yep. It's like hardcore.
And I've actually seen customers, what they'll do is they'll have second factor authentication and they'll lock that in their lawyer's office and the lawyer will have it in their safe. So if you need to get into the root account to break the glass, you actually have to go and
Talk to the lawyer.
talk to your corporate counsel to get that access key.
There's actually basically a workbook for Azure that helps you set up a break the glass account, and it just shows you all the steps to go through. But at the end of it, you basically have a break the glass account and a second factor system. But when you hit that, it's going to fire off automated emails to everyone, and that locks everyone else out, and you have to wait 6 hours. So it sends everyone's emails out, and every one of your other people can hit cancel on that 6-hour process. So if it was a hacker or whatever, then your other coworker would be like, hey Pops, did you do this? No? Cancel.
Stop
But if that was true, then everyone kind of sits there and you wait for that every hour email for 6 hours, and then once that's done, then that new password I set becomes effective.
Okay.
It's a crazy process, but that's one of the ways you would prevent that. And you're instructed to, hey, you should try this. You should do this, please, from your account team, because they don't want to see you get locked out, but they can't help you if you do.
Yep.
Jeez.
It's fun.
Alright, so myth number 4, moving on. I can run my own data center for cheaper than I can do it in the cloud. Maybe, but usually not. It depends on what you're doing and how you're doing it. Like I said, I even have 2 racks of servers at home. That's because it takes 10 milliseconds from me to the closest Google data center, and I don't want to spare 10 milliseconds.
Can't wait that long.
So I have a large cache server in my basement, as well as control servers for all my home networking and everything else. So I have local infrastructure.
And you have a full solar array over your entire.
Right.
No, actually, it's generator. So Google released a really interesting app that you can type in your address, and it will show you how much sun you get.
I saw somebody
Yes.
using that.
That whether it's economical to have. Of course, they announced this on. They were trying to get people to like, hey, look, you can see how easy it is to get solar, and we should use more solar. And I looked up my house, and it was like, I'm gonna have to cut down all my trees.
Yeah, one little section of my roof gets full.
So
That's the
I'm
first thing
also
I
a
said when I
gardener.
went to Gene's house. I was like, geez, you got solar, but you got too many trees.
So I have I'm a gardener, so I have strategically placed garden beds in different places because I have minimal amount of sun, and so I can't run solar. So I actually use there's Acadia, I think it's called Acadia Power, where you can pay them. Basically, you pay the same rate that your you can still get power, I still get power from Georgia Power, but they, through some sort of swap agreements, they're basically like CO2 swap agreements, they run solar panels or wind power somewhere else and swap. So you're paying for somebody else's, you're basically paying for somebody else's solar panels.
Yeah, but when you generating that power, it's not for your house.
Yeah, it's going to the grid.
You're buying it back.
Right, but I'm just paying, the same amount, the flat rate of what Georgia Power, in my case, what their standard rate is.
Because everybody thinks that power's to you.
Yeah.
And it's not.
Yeah. So it's out.
Yeah.
It's powering some other community.
Right.
And I may not be directly benefiting from it, but I'm at least helping, contributing to it because I can't do it myself. But so this one, if as a TAM, I was not on the sales side, but I'd often work with the teams, and this was a very common myth that was easily broken as soon as I got the CFO involved, or someone like that who understood, had a really great customer that they had multiple business units, that they were all separate business entities, and one of those business entities was their IT services firm that they basically did consulting for they did all their data center management. So because they knew chargebacks, they knew exactly how much to charge you for VMware, in VMware, and this is how much storage costs because they'd broken it down. They're really good at breaking it down. We went to their analysts and said, all right, this is what it's going to cost to run an AWS. And they're like, okay, you win. It's if you actually know what the breakdown of that cost is. Now, if you're just running one server, at home, no, it's not going to be. But if you're running a commercial, data center of any size, you're going to be able to either do it cheaper, faster, or better, or some combination in the cloud. And the other thing is, because you're shifting from capital expense to operating expense, the accountants love it in most firms. So it makes it easier. And so again, you're spending too much money. Yes. Oh, let me just flip that light switch off and shut the development.
So the one thing that I have heard about moving to the cloud is that you have to operate differently in the cloud in order to see those savings.
Yes.
So if you take your huge server and all your storage and you just throw it in AWS and just run the exact same thing in AWS, it doesn't work well like that.
No.
You have to use their services like their database management instead of making a VM and throwing your database into it, things like that. You have to operate differently in more of a...
Yeah, and that's one of the things that actually, that's why I started my own consulting company, was to focus on that sort of thing, because what you're describing is industry term of lift and shift, where you're just dropping what you're running in your data center, dropping it into the cloud environment. And yes, you can do that, but that's where when people they look at oh, well, if I run all this in the cloud, it's more expensive. That's because you shouldn't run it that way. You shouldn't be running all of these things the way you're running it in your data center. And so, what I see is, a mix of moving the predominant amount of your workload to the cloud, and there's still going to be a lot of things out in the edge, and cloud vendors now are coming out with all sorts of different things. Of course, there's IoT, Internet of Things, they all have toolkits for that, but there's also, they're starting to build integrations into either appliances that run in your data center, which is great for, like, if you have you have a retail store and you need a local, you think of like a big box store, they're running some sort of VMware stack in the back typically, to run all the cash registers and everything. So there's still always going to be a need for a certain amount of local compute, but you can now do command and control from the cloud and manage everything and move as much of that processing out to where it's cheapest. And that's another thing where being able to move things around different regions. If I normally want to have a workload run in, take AWS, US West 1 is the San Francisco Bay Area data center. It's the most expensive one in the United States. You can, if you need to run your core workload there for some reason, you can do that, but then you can run batch in some other location. And so you can just move workloads around, and you can distribute workloads and tasks run across data centers. And that's how a lot of how Google operates differently is you'll see a lot of things that are, you pick a region versus like a geographical region. Say I want this to run in the United States, or I want to run this in APAC, or I want to run this in the EU. And it, your processing could be one of several different data centers. And like I said, with like Google, they actually show you where all the data centers are, but not all of those data centers are Google Cloud data centers. So some of them are for Google Cloud, some are internal, some are mixed. So you can actually look it up on Google's website. So they publish, and they also own all their own fiber, and they encrypt all their traffic over that fiber. So even because they don't trust anybody.
That's right.
So myth number 5. Did we cover everything? Cover.
Yep.
Yeah, we got covered. All right, so myth 5. I'm gonna have to lay off my staff, start over because it's new, or from the other side of the coin is, oh, I'm gonna lose my job. I don't want to bring the cloud in because I'm a Microsoft admin, or I do AD admin, and this is an argument that I've heard. I don't want to run in the cloud because I'm a Microsoft AD admin, and there's AD servers that it's a managed service, so I'm going to lose my job. That's not true. Somebody still has to manage those things. Somebody still needs to build. What I see is it makes your life easier, and this is why I say at the beginning of why the cloud is going to help your business and your IT career, because it makes things easier. It's different, so you're going to have to learn a new skill, but always learning a new skill is a good thing. In the IT world or anywhere else, constant improvement. I personally try to learn something every day. I watch way too much YouTube. And I actually drove down and was listening to audiobooks. So there's all kinds of ways you can learn. But with the cloud, there's definitely a new operating model, and there's different ways of operating, and so you don't necessarily want to force fit the traditional IT model into the cloud. You want to rethink of how you do that, and so I recommend people really invest in learning how to operate optimally in the cloud. There's certainly a your job may change because of the cloud. Moving how you function, how organizations. The big buzzword is digital transformation. It's basically making people rebuild their teams because a lot of big corporate IT is broken, and so digital transformation is really taking the CIO and ripping their organization apart and then rebuilding it for them. That's a lot of what we would do to help customers reorganize around the new operating model.
So I mean, this whole cloud thing, you can basically just, expand or contract your computer needs as you need to.
Right.
Couldn't they just extend this to like IT professionals, just like have a big Amazon warehouse full of people and you just spin up a couple IT managers when you need them and then press the button and turn them off when you don't?
That's an MSP.
But do they
That's
have
what
the
an
next
MSP
thing?
That's what an MSP is.
Literally what an MSP is.
Managed service
do that.
provider.
Okay.
It's out there.
So it sounds like this kind of
Amazon
does
doesn't do it,
threaten
but other
my
people
job.
do.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's like 8 of them in Jacksonville.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
And you would say, hey, I don't need an IT person full-time, or I need
But
8
that's
different
always
IT
been,
people.
they've been outsourcing since I was, that's how I got my first job, because I was a temp
They're
contractor.
very popular with small companies too.
It's
Yeah.
popular with big
I don't have-
companies who just wanna
It's just
say,
harder to turn them off than it is to
I need a
turn 'em
SQL
on.
expert a couple days a week.
Wow.
I can't afford a SQL expert, but I can have one a couple days a week.
Yeah.
You ban, then you get,
Upwork, there's all sorts of things, your freelance work, there's,
Tech Systems does that, don't they? Tech
Um,
Systems.
No, they're headhunters.
Yeah,
Are they? Okay.
yeah,
but
they
a
use
lot
sponsor,
of
like,
the contract model,
Enterprise integration.
Okay.
a lot of temp, either temp agencies, you're getting into that mix of, hey, I need an admin for a week,
Mm-hmm.
and then get rid of them.
right.
You
I have
can do that
exchange.
now, it just doesn't happen to me, but
Managed service.
what I would say is, if you understand the cloud, and you have cloud skills, you are more likely to have job security within your organization, within your company, because you're a resource there that owns that. But then, or you could be like me and go off and do your own thing.
Or if you're willing to learn, that's the other thing.
Yeah.
Is if you're an infrastructure guy, you're an old school infrastructure guy, and you refuse to learn how to do things in the cloud, yeah, you might
Yeah.
not have as
Well,
much
if
security.
you work in IT and you refuse to learn,
yeah,
should be
you're-
in IT.
Yeah, so and literally, the only job, and that he's talking about infrastructure, the only job that I've ever seen actually eliminated when we brought a customer all into the cloud, no matter which cloud vendor it was, the only person who ever got let go was the person who all they did was rack and stack servers.
Yep.
And which, as someone who used to rack and stack servers at one point in my career, I'm fine with not having that job.
Someone else can have that job.
And there's some Google employs people that rack and stack servers, Amazon. So the job is just shifted, and it's still it's just improved in a way. So now you can do everything. You can deploy. You write a script and deploy your entire stack. What would have taken me 18 months to get funding, get funding approved, then get a PO cut, then submit an order with the vendor, have it shipped, wait for the systems team to rack and stack it in the data center for me, another month for the OS guy to come around and the OS, and then the networking guy had to come by, and it would just take forever. In 30 minutes, you write a script, hit deploy, all of that's up and running.
You spend
Or even do it automatically.
write a script and you spend $8,000. Oops.
Oops.
Yeah.
I'm in T1, not T3.
That AWS build does shoot up quick, doesn't it?
There are budget reminders.
There are budget
reminders on all the platforms that I'm aware of.
There are budget limits.
Everyone's done it.
And that's also why there's quotas. So
Yeah,
the
quotas,
real
yeah.
reason why cloud vendors have quotas is not for capacity planning, although that is part of how they manage capacity. They have quota limits on things so that you're not spinning up stuff more than you realize you're doing. And it helps with like that scenario, the hacker scenario, somebody that gets in and spins up a bunch of Bitcoin mining servers. if you have a quota in all of your regions that you can only spin up, that you can spin 0 of the type of machine that's used for Bitcoin mining. Even if you get compromised, they can't get there. They can't get there.
Also helps with DevOps if you want to give your developers some access to be able to spin things up and take things down, but you can only do this much.
Yeah.
So that not everyone at the same time is trying to do it.
Yeah. So what I see here, you know, ultimately is, again, your you know, my job here as part of this presentation is really just to evangelize the cloud skill set, to learn how to deploy in the cloud, how to operate the cloud in a cloud model, because it really frees you up with a lot of day-to-day tasks. You can automate a lot of things that couldn't be done before, and you're going to have to build new things that you didn't have a problem with before, because there's new problems to be solved. So your skills will always be in demand. You will never not be busy in IT if you're doing it right.
Until they're replaced with robots.
Even
But then somebody's got to take care of the robots.
I thought that's what you do now.
But
I'm just saying, eventually we'll be able to automate everything.
You'll be able to automate everything.
It has to be like where all the stop signs are for some reason.
So are you hiring?
Is this a stop sign?
Not yet.
Not yet? All right.
Not yet. But yeah, so what I recommend, you know, if you're interested in learning more cloud, if you don't have an opportunity within your business, your company to get involved with cloud infrastructure, there's a lot of free training. Of course, YouTube has a ton of stuff. You can get free accounts on most of the cloud. At least I know at least the top 3, you know, the big 3 provide a limited amount of capacity. I think Google has the best free tier because they give you $300 worth of credit for the first year. Plus, there's what's called the always free tier of certain services that you get, like you know, 30 gigs of object storage a month for free. But
I haven't done my free year at Google yet.
So,
Or Minecraft servers.
No.
So,
New Minecraft servers.
So my company is Linking Systems. Like I said, I just started it, and really my focus is on the optimization piece. So figuring out how to break existing things apart and put them back together more efficiently. But any other questions? Yes, sir.
Hi, Daniel. It's nice to see you again. Are there restrictions to the kind or amount of security you can use in a cloud environment? Are there any restrictions if you want to encrypt your data? Is someone going to go like, you can't do that?
No. In fact, most cloud vendors, they by default want you to encrypt your data. And so, not with the exception of maybe China, which is because you can encrypt whatever you want as long as they have the keys. Because there's you know all encryption keys. You can encrypt keys with most vendors now. Most cloud vendors, what they're doing is what's called a user managed key that allows you to have your own key management appliance. They call them HSMs. And basically they're key dispensers. So you have an off token to be able to get and exchange an encryption key to encrypt or decrypt something, and you can pass that encryption key. So you maintain the encryption keys, and you get an auth request. Can I unlock this? It says yes. Here you go. Here's the key. And then recycles it.
I was wondering if one of the questions you forgot was, how is this less secure than my in-house servers?
So, funny enough, before Capital One had their incident, they actually went on the record of saying that they their AWS infrastructure was more secure than their own data centers. I don't know if they changed their tune on that one, but ultimately it was their fault because they left
Left it unlocked.
They left it unlocked. They left their front door unlocked, and surprisingly, someone
Well,
was
that
there.
they taunted.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, when you say that, that just gives you a gigantic bullseye.
yeah. But most, you know, the cloud vendors will provide their own kind of key management, as well as some cloud vendors have hardware appliances. So like a cloud HSM, it's an appliance where literally if someone were to, so if you open the box, it self-destructs. And it operates the same way on-prem. So if you literally unscrew the case, it destroys itself. So it destroys the keys, so it can't be stolen. The only way to reuse it is you have to reset it, and it actually stores all the keys in memory, and that's how one of the ways it destroys it, because it'll destroy it destroys its own RAM.
Kind
And
of like an
don't-
iron key? Kind of like an iron key?
Yeah. Yeah.
I will
So
say, from my view, these cloud providers make it easier to do
Yeah.
that sort of encryption versus you doing it, on-prem yourself, because then you have to really be an expert at this appliance versus just following an API. And
yeah, by default, Google, everything is encrypted on Google. So if you spin up a VM with disk attached to it, by default, it's encrypted disk. So it does make it easier. You still need to think about security standards. You want to use some sort of TLS, SSL encryption in between systems, or some other sort of encryption between systems for data transfer or for data at rest. And you can encrypt it yourself with your own key, and then put it in the cloud, and then take it back out and decrypt it with your own key, so that the key itself never goes into the cloud environment. That's actually particular backup software I use that does that. So you cannot decrypt. You can't read that data in the cloud, even though I back it up to the cloud. It's sitting in, right now it's in a DCS bucket. But I used to have it in an S3 bucket.
So I could do that in the Chinese region and it would be okay?
Well, no, that's the one
They
thing.
won't let you.
Well, you have to be a Chinese business entity to operate them.
Basically, you can't get in the Gov Cloud unless you have a reason to be there. I tried.
Yeah. And there's separate authentication systems too. So those types of regions are air gapped from even though they're technically connected to the internet, they're air gapped from the rest of the administration. So code that gets deployed is, there's separate code repos, there's separate sources of truth for everything that runs in those regions. And that pretty much goes for all the cloud vendors. They all have to operate, especially in China, because that's a Chinese government restriction, is that in order to operate in China, you have to have a Chinese business entity. So you basically have to have a business in China, or have some sort of operating agreement in China to be sponsored, that the government will then sponsor you to be able to operate. It takes about a month to get approval under the right circumstances. I did have a customer who had to go through it, and the first question we had to ask was, well, do you have a Chinese subsidiary? Because if you don't, then you can't operate. The next best thing is Singapore, because that's the closest from a network latency perspective. If you want to operate, if you have an audience in China, typically running in Singapore, because their next hop. And that's basically, when I used to work for Pearson Education, and we had a Chinese subsidiary, and we actually had to route all of our China traffic through Singapore as well, because we had a network, our own private network loop around the world, and then hop from Singapore. We had a kind of a network base in Singapore that then connected into mainland China. And then from mainland China, we have data centers, but we only have like 5 meg traffic between each data center because the infrastructure wasn't there yet.
Any questions? Maybe a little bit off topic, but what's your take on Stadia? Google's new gaming platform?
The game streaming.
Oh, so I ordered mine. I pre-ordered.
Apparently he's for it.
Apparently he's ready to test.
How do you think they're gonna get over the latency?
I don't know, it'll be interesting, but
10 milliseconds between the data center to his house? I don't know how they're gonna do it.
Negative latency.
I remember hearing about that.
but basically from my and about half of that latency is between my computer over my Wi-Fi to my router.
Good lord. 5? I was psyched at like 9.
Gotta run a hardwire.
Yep.
Yeah.
Can't have that.
So yeah, it's funny because I think a lot of vendors are starting to do this. You're even on Android phones, you can play a game before you download it now. You're starting to see that a lot of different vendors are building that capability. I'm trying to think of so Steam, so Valve, they came up with a platform where you can run, the way it's licensed, you can only run from one place at a time, basically. But you can have your server or a gaming box sitting on your desk, and then more or less remote desktop, run a client. You run the Steam client, and it's remote desktoping in and running all the heavy GPU work and over the network, and it works pretty good. And
Even through the internet.
yeah, and I ran that actually when I worked at AWS, because somebody had written an article on how to do that.
For more information on that, see the Gaming on Linux talk on the Jacksonville Linux Users Group YouTube channel.
Does all this stuff spell the impending doom of the gaming desktop someday?
I doubt it.
It's not very good for Twitch gaming either.
Well, and the enthusiast who's going to go and spend 3 or 4 grand on their PC is not going to go and rent a gaming PC per hour.
Yeah, I think there's 2 things. One is, I mean, I bought I bought the Stadia, I think special anniversary editions and stuff. I prepaid for it because I want to check it out. I want to play with it.
Cool.
But I also have a ridiculously overbuilt multi-GPU box at home that I told my wife was mostly for gaming, but I was doing GPU mining for a while. But I still play video games on it, so it
counts.
It counts. Yeah.
What's your power bill?
You don't want it.
I accidentally ran dual GPU cards and CPU mining turned on max settings for a month and forgot about it. I never turned it off, and that was over the summer. That was in August. $700.
Oh, Lord. Did you make it up in Bitcoin? No.
No. I made about $25 in Monero.
Can you combine those GPUs with a water heater or something?
Yes, actually.
Yes, I do have water cooling as well. I have water cooling as well.
Central air,
Hook that up to your hot tub.
Hook it up to the hot tub.
There was a company that was like going to put
There was an
servers in
episode
one's house
on
to heat their house.
Linus
And then like just
That's
basically
on
you put
YouTube. where it talks about heating your house
You would serve in everyone's
with
house.
a mining server.
And they would make the network.
Genius.
A gaming server,
A
basically.
heat exchanger.
Yeah.
Heat exchanger.
And so, you know, you do all your gaming in the winter, because they're in Canada, so it's very, very cold.
Yeah.
So, you know, you gotta heat up your house, play games.
No, that's when you start Bitcoin mining.
Yeah. Well, there was actually, even I saw somebody on Reddit talking about, they're like, we found this like super cheap, one municipality in Canada where the power was ridiculously cheap, and because it was so cold most of the year, they figured out if they ran it during the, basically everything except during the summer, that they could make it work financially. It was financially viable to run GPU mining in this one town.
The one place in the
That
world
one
that works.
place.
Yeah. But there are other places. There are other places in the world where power is super cheap, and that's why China power is super cheap. That's where most of the mining is happening.
Yeah.
Now you can't compete with it. It's all ASIC mining on Bitcoin.
Well, they also produce the chips.
Also true.
Yeah.
So is this where global warming is coming from?
Actually, kind of.
Yes.
But iPhones are different, so.
Yeah.
All right.
Cool. So,
Thank you very much.